The cargo drone's engines thrummed softly, barely audible over the recycled hum of the decrepit airlock. Sarah sat beside Jason, eyes fixed on the slowly receding silhouette of Station 9A Theta, a fortress of cruelty and secrets now left behind. Around them, the children huddled together in the cramped hold, faces pale but alive. Some whispered quietly, others simply stared at the worn walls, absorbing the reality of their escape. They were no longer prisoners, no longer broken weapons. They were free. Jason exhaled deeply, the weight of the past weeks pressing on his chest. He had risked everything for this moment, his life, his freedom, his sanity. And yet, as he glanced at Sarah, the pain felt lighter. Because in her eyes he saw something that transcended survival. Hope. "Where do we go now?" he asked. Sarah's gaze shifted to the stars visible through the viewport, endless black dotted with distant suns. "Wherever we choose. The galactic fringes are vast. Somewhere no one knows who we are." Jason nodded. "No trackers, no hunters." "Not yet," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. He smiled back, the first genuine one in a long time. They were fugitives now, rebels, survivors, the broken made whole, and their story was just beginning. Behind them, the shadows of the Scythe Empire's cruelty faded into silence. Ahead, the unknown stretched vast and wild, a frontier begging to be reclaimed. Jason looked at Sarah again. "You said you'd come back for me." She reached out, taking his hand firmly. "I did, and I will again, if I must." The cargo drone veered into the cold void of space, a tiny vessel carrying the last hope of a new future. Because sometimes, the greatest weapon isn't a blaster or a blade. It's the courage to heal, the courage to fight for something better, the courage to believe in home. The second night fell harder than the first. Alien moons, 4 of them, glowed with a cold light above the dense canopy. Strange calls echoed through the trees, deep and wet, like something massive breathing just beyond vision. The other cadets had finally stopped arguing, mostly out of fear. At the base of the treehouse, the Akrathi leader, Sorel, was curled into a trembling ball of limbs and fur, muttering equations under her breath like they were incantations against death. The Thrikakon hadn't moved in 20 minutes. His chitinous legs clicked nervously whenever the wind shifted. Only Cadet Rivers still moved with purpose. From his perch atop the treehouse, he scanned the perimeter, tying glow thread tripwires between trees and sprinkling crushed hot root spice around the base. The aliens didn't understand the latter, but Jason knew that in many ecosystems, even apex predators hated the sting of capsaicin. "Human," hissed a voice from below. It was the Ralph female, feathers drooped. "You are not afraid?" Jason slid down the rope ladder and landed with a soft thump. He tossed her a ration bar. "Not of the dark, no. I was born in worse forest than this." She tilted her head. "That is not statistically likely." He shrugged. "You ever been to Northern Ontario?" Blank stare. "Exactly." Suddenly, a howl rose from the east, deep, throaty, almost mechanical. The Thrikakon spasmed. "That is not in the field briefing. No registered predator on this planet makes that call." Jason frowned. "Yeah, I figured they might throw in some surprises. This is a military test, after all." Sorel shot up, eyes wide. "They would not deploy experimental fauna during a cadet test. That violates 23 treaties." Jason just gave her that infuriating, calm, human grin. "Then either you're wrong, or you're dead. Either way, not my problem unless it's chewing on my leg." A low growl vibrated through the underbrush. This time, close. Too close. Jason dropped to a crouch, motioning silently for everyone to stay down. Even without training, they obeyed. There was something about his presence now. Something steady. Anchor-like. From the shadows stepped a shape. It was taller than any of them. 4 arms. wet skin gleaming in the moonlight, a face like a shark carved into a skull. It sniffed the air and took a step forward. One of the Akrathi whimpered. Jason stood. "What are you?" Sorel whispered in panic. Jason didn't answer. He pulled something from his belt, a metal cylinder. The predator growled again. Jason thumbed a switch. Whoosh! A pillar of fire erupted from the makeshift flamethrower. The predator screeched, stumbling backward, thrashing through the underbrush before disappearing into the dark. The aliens stared in stunned silence. "Flamethrower," Jason said casually, blowing on the nozzle like it was a smoking gun. "Made it from my camp stove and some ethanol I boiled out of ration packets. You guys did read the survival manual, right?" No one spoke. Jason turned and climbed back up his rope ladder, whistling. From the platform above, his voice drifted down. "You panic. I prepare." By the morning of day 2, the predator hadn't returned, but its absence didn't bring peace, just a tense, electrified silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and the alien cadets did the same. Except Jason Rivers. The human was up before dawn, stripping bark from a viney tree and weaving a net while humming to himself. The aliens watched from below the treehouse, baffled, exhausted, and increasingly curious. "You act as if this place is your den," Sorel muttered. Jason glanced down. Not a den, more like a workshop. The Thrik Khan, whose name was Trevix, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "You have created traps." "Yup," Jason said, tying off the last knot. "Trip snares, swinging logs, noise alarms. I even rigged some spicy bait laced with antihistamines. Should keep most carnivores either sneezing or vomiting." "That is disturbing," Trevix muttered. "And ingenious." Compliment accepted. Down below, the other cadets had stopped arguing about who was in charge. Now they were following Jason, quietly, watching how he carved, prepared, reinforced. There was a reluctant respect forming, one that transcended biology or culture, because while they debated and theorized, the human built. And when monsters came in the night, he burned them back. Raella, the Ralth, fluttered to Jason's perch as he fitted sharpened stakes to a swing trap. "How do your kind learn these things?" He looked at her. "Earth. It's a Class 5 death world. Everything on it either kills you or teaches you how to not die. But you have cities, ships, and bears, spiders, parasites, rivers that drown, winds that kill, volcanoes that explode with no warning." He paused. "One time I got frostbite walking to school." She blinked. "We just call it January," he added. Suddenly, an alarm chime rang out. One of the glow thread tripwires had triggered. Jason's head snapped toward the sound. From the northern tree line, 2 shapes stalked forward, different from the previous predator. These ones moved in tandem, low, deliberate, coordinated. Their eyes glowed faintly red, and their claws glistened with some bioluminescent resin. The aliens panicked again. Jason didn't. He slid down the ladder, grabbed a makeshift spear, and walked forward like a man out for groceries. Raella squawked in protest. "You cannot go alone." Jason paused. "If I don't go, they get closer, and I don't like uninvited guests." He advanced. The creatures circled. One lunged. Jason sidestepped, jabbed with the spear, and then, without pause, rolled beneath the second's leap. His movements weren't textbook military. They were raw, brutal, real. He fought like someone who had once fought with rocks and fire before they ever held a rifle. The aliens watched, paralyzed, as the human took on 2 apex predators, and one. One lay dead, the other fled, wounded and screaming. Jason stood there, panting slightly, one arm cut and bleeding. He turned to the others. "You can panic, or you can learn." Then he limped back to the treehouse, leaving stunned silence behind. Jason stitched his arm with fishing line by the dim blue light of a solar pack. He didn't flinch. The alien cadets sat below the treehouse in stunned silence, having just witnessed a lone human kill 2 predators with nothing but a spear and clever footwork. None of them spoke. Not yet. Then Sorel, still trembling, finally asked, "Why didn't you call for extraction?" Jason looked up. "What?" "You're wounded. You killed a predator. The test allows early exit under lethal threat." "Why didn't you press your emergency tag?" Jason chuckled. "Because I'm not done." Raella folded her wings close. "Done with what?" He nodded at the camp. "Teaching you how to live." There was a long silence. The truth was beginning to sink in. This wasn't bravado. This wasn't recklessness. This was training. Jason wasn't just surviving, he was preparing them. And somehow, the fear they'd carried since the drop was being replaced by something strange. Something terrifying and new. Respect. That night, Jason called them together. Around a small, smokeless fire, built in a pit using rocks and an insulating tarp, he dropped a bundle of sharpened sticks and vines. "Tonight," he said, "we make weapons. Tomorrow we hunt." Raella blinked. "We? As in, us?" "You're not going to last 72 hours hiding in the dirt and hoping predators pass you by," Jason said flatly. "We don't wait for the dark to swallow us. We walk into it with torches and teeth." Trivix muttered, "That is not how most prey species think." Jason gave him a long look. "Maybe that's your problem." And then, something incredible happened. They listened. Under Jason's guidance, they built spears, practiced grip and stance, and learned how to set tripwire alarms. He taught them how to identify local insects that were high in protein, how to boil bark for antiseptic, and how to reinforce the treehouse with leaf layer insulation. Even Sorel, who had nearly broken down mentally on day 1, now sat beside Jason, sharpening a stone blade with laser focus. By midnight, the predators returned. They didn't stalk this time. They charged. Aggressive. Testing. Jason stood at the base of the treehouse, torch in one hand, spear in the other. But before he could step forward, a blur of motion darted past him. It was Trivix, the Thrikakon jabbed with his spear. Not perfect form, but fast and determined. His second arm held a net made from vine fiber, which he hurled directly onto the lead creature's legs. It tripped, screeched, rolled. The others followed. Raella, diving from above, struck with a sharpened branch. Sorel used one of Jason's smoke pods. Even the Zenari twins flanked the rear with fire-hardened staves. They didn't defeat the beasts, but they drove them off. Together. Later, as they sat around the fire again, bloodied, exhausted, and silent, Jason looked at each of them. "You were scared," he said, "but you didn't let fear decide who you are. That's what makes you dangerous." The fire cracked softly. "Fear is normal," Jason continued, "but fear is a choice." He tossed a fresh log on the fire. "So is fire." The predators didn't return the next night, but the forest did. Around midday, the sky turned black, not from nightfall, but from a massive flock of shrieking, needle-winged avians bursting from the northern trees. A storm was coming. Not rain. Something worse. Jason stood at the edge of camp, squinting at the horizon. The wind smelled of ash and copper. Trivix twitched his antennae. "The bioscanners say the pressure drop is abnormally sharp. This isn't just weather. Something's destabilizing the canopy ecosystem." Raella's feathers fluffed in alarm. The predators were fleeing it. Jason turned toward the group, voice sharp. "Pack everything. We're moving." "But where?" asked Sorel, gripping her makeshift satchel. "If the whole zone's going active, where do we even go?" Jason pointed up. "Higher ground. There's a ridge half a click south. We'll make a fallback camp there." He didn't wait for debate. In 15 minutes, the treehouse was dismantled, gear was packed, and the alien cadets, once paralyzed by fear, were now following Jason's orders like seasoned scouts. And they needed to. Because by the time they reached the ridge, The forest had turned against them. Carnivorous plants, dormant for years, had bloomed in the underbrush. A vine tried to drag a Zenari twin into the earth. Spore clouds hissed from fungi that hadn't existed on any pre-mission database. Something had awakened. Jason moved through it all with cold efficiency, hacking a path, clearing obstacles, and lighting smoke wards soaked in his signature hot root cocktail. They reached the ridge just as the wind turned sharp and metallic. From the valley behind them, they saw it. A chasm had opened, a biological one. The forest floor itself had collapsed, revealing something ancient beneath, pulsing, fleshy, vast. Terraforming chamber, Sorel whispered. Jason grunted, more like a buried weapon. He dropped his pack and began unloading materials. "What are you doing?" asked Trevix. "Making firebombs." No one laughed. Instead, they started helping. By dusk, the ridge had been reinforced with sharpened palisades, traps, alarms, and a row of handmade Molotovs made from medical ethanol, rations oil, and bark wick. Jason didn't sleep. Neither did the others. Because when the new creatures came, things that crawled from the glowing fault in the forest's heart, they came fast. Too many to fight in open combat. Jason raised his arm. "Hold the line." He hurled the first flame, and the forest burned. By morning, the ridge still stood. Smoke curled around the smoldering trees. Bodies, alien, fungal, bestial, lay scattered in the scorched earth below. And in the middle of it all, the cadets stood upright, bloodied, burned, but alive. Jason turned to them slowly. Soot streaked across his face, eyes hard. "This test," he said, "it's not about survival. It's about what kind of survivor you're going to be." By the 6th day, the simulation no longer felt like a test. Jason knew the signs. Too much chaos, too little control. The predator migration, the forest bloom, the biotic chasm. This wasn't curriculum. This was something breaking loose. And command hadn't come. No drone drops, no updates, not even a warning ping. They'd been cut off. The cadets, aliens from across the Galactic Coalition, had stopped asking when they'd be extracted. Now they asked Jason what came next. Jason gave them plans. The ridge had become a fortress. Palisades were reinforced with sap adhesive and thorny branches. Signal flares lined the high points, repurposed from training kits. The treehouse, rebuilt as a watchtower twice as tall. Each cadet had taken a role. Raella and the Zenari twins patrolled the perimeter by wing. Trevix led trap resets. Sorel, once terrified of mud and insects, now crafted detailed logs of regional predator paths and edible flora. They weren't students anymore. They were survivors. "Why do you know how to do all this?" Raella asked one night. Her feathers glowed faintly in the campfire light. "You act like you've lived 1,000 lives." Jason looked up from sharpening a blade. "I grew up on Earth." "That doesn't explain. I grew up in the ruins of Detroit arcology after the flood wars. I was 13 when I learned how to fight over food. 17 when I led a raid. 20 when I joined the UN Peaceborn because I was either going to die in a street fight or die somewhere with a purpose." The fire crackled. Jason's voice dropped. "When Earth was accepted into the coalition, everyone assumed we'd be the weak ones, the primitive species, the unpredictable wild card." He looked around at the cadets. "But we don't survive because we're brutal. We survive because we've had to rebuild everything we love from ash. Again, and again, and again." Sorel whispered. "They thought humans were just another species." Jason nodded slowly. "They didn't realize we were the ones who run toward the fire." Suddenly, a chirp burst from the radio pack. Static, then a garbled signal. "Unit 7. Unauthorized zone breach. Biological containment. Evacuate if..." Jason was already on his feet. "They're coming," he said. "The real ones this time." Trevix's voice was tense. "Military?" "No. Bioforms, worse. Something the coalition didn't expect us to trigger." He looked out over the treetops. Gear up, everyone. This isn't a test anymore. From the west, a low droning hum began to rise, like engines but alive. Deep, pulsing, coming fast. Whatever was buried beneath this forest wasn't supposed to wake up. But now, it was angry. Now, the ridge shook, not from impact but from something deeper, older. The forest no longer sounded like trees and life. It sounded like breathing. Jason stood frozen for half a second, listening. Low and steady. Something alive was beneath them, not a beast, not a nest, not even a predator. A creature so massive and ancient that it had become part of the ecosystem itself. Subterranean bioform, he muttered, not a rogue species, a buried entity. They built this test around it. But why would the Coalition risk a training ground near something like that? Sorel asked, half panicked. They didn't, Jason replied. They didn't know it was here. Trevik snapped his mandibles. Then why is the emergency channel silent? Jason met his eyes. Because someone does know now, and they're letting it play out. Suddenly, a long, bellowing roar tore through the jungle, followed by the crack of falling trees. Birds exploded from the canopy like a reverse waterfall. In the distance, a massive shadow rose, vague, writhing, and biomechanical. It didn't walk. It undulated, as if the very roots of the forest carried it forward. Jason's voice cut through the stunned silence. Positions! This isn't a fight we win. This is a fight we endure. The cadets didn't hesitate. They weren't students anymore. Raella soared overhead, scanning for movement. The twins dropped down from the trees to reinforce the spike lines. Sorel triggered the hidden scent burners, strips soaked in a chemical blend Jason had made from local resins and insect acid. It would confuse thermal trackers. Jason, meanwhile, climbed the tower. He had 2 flares, one smoke, one bright enough to mark extraction targets for orbital recon. He lit neither. Not yet. The jungle ahead parted like it was rotting. And then they saw it. A creature bigger than a crawler ship, with eyes like buried stars and limbs covered in bark-fused bone. It dragged itself on tendrils and claws, pulsing with bioluminescent veins. It wasn't angry. It wasn't hunting. It was waking. Jason's grip tightened on the railing. This is older than the Coalition, he said. Maybe older than your species. It's a remnant, something forgotten, something the test site accidentally poked. Then what do we do? Raella asked. We don't run. That thing's not coming for us, not yet. It's coming because something called it. And until we find out who, he raised the flare gun. We're not going anywhere. Below, the cadets began setting the last lines of defense. Nets, pit traps, flame walls. And Jason stood above them all, not afraid, ready. Because whatever this thing was, it had never met a human before. The forest was silent now. Not peaceful, paralyzed. Even the wind had stopped moving. Jason watched from the tower as the colossal bioform slithered closer. It didn't move like a predator. It moved like an extinction. Beneath him, the cadets crouched behind barricades, clutching handmade spears and pulse blasters salvaged from Jason's emergency crate. They were shaking, but they stood. Jason lit the first flare and fired it into the sky. A bright, searing red burst above the canopy. It wasn't a call for help, it was a warning. Anyone still watching us from orbit better start paying attention, he muttered. Sorel climbed up beside him. That thing, it's not natural. It's not even alive the way we understand it. I scanned its biofield. It's got architecture, like it was built, but also grew. Jason didn't flinch. Engineered extinction, probably bioforged during one of the ancient wars the Coalition pretends never happened. Raella's voice came through the comms, tense. Movement on the west perimeter, smaller bioforms, like drones. I think the main one's spawning them. Then it's not just here to walk, it's here to terraform, Jason said, to overwrite the biome. Why here? Why now? Trivix snapped from the eastern line. Why wake this? Jason exhaled slowly. Because someone made a mistake. The creature reached the outer ridge. Roots split beneath its weight. Pheromone clouds hissed from vents in its side. The first wave of spawnlings, small spider-like things with glowing green eyes, rushed the barricade. Jason shouted, "Engage!" Flames lit up the ridge as oil-soaked walls ignited. Screeches erupted. The cadets fought, furiously together. Spears struck, nets snapped, traps held. But there were too many. Jason grabbed his makeshift detonator, a trigger for an explosive bundle buried in the ridge wall. He looked down at Sorel. "Tell the others to fall back to secondary position. We're collapsing the outer wall." Her eyes widened. "You'll be cut off. Go." She went. Jason waited until the last cadet crossed the fallback line. Then he pressed the trigger. The ridge shook as the wall collapsed, engulfing the advancing biospawn in fire and stone. The shockwave flattened the trees behind the tower. Even the great bioform paused, only for a second. Then it roared. Jason reeled back, blood dripping from his ears. "Now you're listening," he muttered. He descended the tower just as Raella and the twins secured the fallback point. The cadets were burned, bruised, but alive. Sorel handed him a cracked data tablet. "We found something. During the retreat. A beacon, buried near the first collapse zone." Jason scanned it. His jaw clenched. Coalition tech. Recent. Someone activated the ancient system deliberately. Trivix growled. Why would anyone unleash this? Jason looked up at the creature. Because someone wanted to see how humans would react. The bioform reared back, its massive limbs displacing entire sections of forest. Where it moved, life didn't just die. It converted. Trees turned to bone. Soil grew glassy veins. The jungle's code was being overwritten like a corrupted file. Jason's mind raced. This wasn't just a creature. It was a terraforming protocol, living code embedded in flesh. A weapon meant to consume ecosystems and rewrite them in the image of something else. And someone had turned it on like a lab switch. "They weren't testing us with the forest," he said aloud. "We were the test." Rella blinked. "But we're cadets." "Exactly," Jason growled. "Disposable variables. They wanted to see how long we'd last." Trivix's mandibles clacked. "So what now, human? What does your species do when they realize they're being used?" Jason looked out at the burning forest, then back to the half-buried coalition beacon Sorel had unearthed. "What we've always done," he said. "We break the rules. We break the script." Over the next hour, they moved fast. Jason and Sorel cracked into the beacon's controls. Though most of it was encrypted beyond their level, Jason bypassed the system with raw human tenacity, prying open panels, cross-wiring circuits, and even igniting a mini EMP burst with a power cell and metal shavings. What they found chilled everyone. "Autonomous bioengineered weapon test," Sorel translated. "Unknown origin, tagged Oblivion Seed. Activation logs show, Jason, this was turned on from orbit 30 minutes after we entered the forest." Jason clenched his jaw. So the forest didn't glitch. This was triggered deliberately. By who? Jason didn't answer right away. Instead, he activated the beacon's signal flare. A thin pulse shot skyward, visible to anything in orbit. Not a distress call, not a request, a warning. He turned to the cadets. They wanted to see how the human would handle being hunted by a deathworld god thing. Well, now they're going to see what happens when the human decides to hunt it. The cadets geared up. Every weapon salvaged. Every explosive handcrafted. Jason had them soak nets in hot root oil and wrap spears in rebar coils. He turned the fallen treehouse tower into a pressure-triggered trap. The fallback camp became a war zone. And Jason? He walked straight toward the bioform with a bandolier of firebombs and the coalition beacon strapped to his back. "Where are you going?" Raella called. "To give it something to chase." The creature responded instantly. It surged forward, all roots and tendrils and sound. Jason ran, hurling flame behind him, leading it exactly where he wanted, into the heart of the camp, where every cadet waited. They struck. Explosives, traps, fire, screams, unity. A species from 12 worlds stood together behind a human who wasn't just surviving. He was fighting back. As the final firebomb exploded beneath the bioform's primary root cluster, it let out a screech that shook the air itself and began to collapse. Veins of light flickered, bones shattered. The creature fell, half consumed by its own runaway mutation. Jason dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Smoke billowed. The cadets stood, blinking in stunned silence. Sorel finally spoke. "We won." Jason shook his head. "No, we survived." Then he looked up at the distant sky, where somewhere above, the ones who triggered this were watching. And now they know what that really means. Smoke curled through the ruined forest, drifting in lazy spirals above scorched roots and broken trees. The Oblivion Seed was dead. Its massive biomechanical body lay still, no longer pulsing, no longer spreading its planetary rewrite. But the cadets didn't celebrate. They buried their dead in silence. 2 had fallen, Zenari twins, who'd held the left flank when the creature broke through. Jason carved simple markers for them out of stone and placed them on the ridge. "We survive," he said quietly. "But we remember." A hush settled over them. Raella touched his shoulder, her feathers dulled from smoke. "You think they're still watching?" Jason didn't need to look up. "Oh, they're watching. But they're not just observers anymore, they're guilty." 2 hours later, the first real Coalition dropship arrived, sleek, silent, and far too late. Commander Alrix stepped out. Coalition High Command, rank insignias gleaming, facial expression neutral. He took one look at the destruction, at the cadets wrapped in burn cloth, and at Jason, still holding a blade made from a shattered piece of reactor shielding, and said, "Cadet Harper, report." Jason stared at him, then threw the cracked Coalition beacon at Alrix's boots. "You activated the seed," he said flatly. The commander's eyes narrowed. "You're not authorized to make that accusation." "You buried us here," Jason continued. "Told no one. Cut communications. And you watched to see what we'd do." "This was a containment protocol," Alrix snapped. "The weapon was ancient, forgotten. We needed field data." Jason stepped closer. The cadets tensed behind him. "You didn't test the weapon," Jason said. "You tested us." Alrix's face twitched. Jason continued. "You wanted to see what happened when untested species faced planetary-level threats without guidance, without help. You thought we'd fold, collapse, or maybe go feral." He raised his voice loud enough for the body cam drones hovering above. "But we built, we organized, we fought. You gave us hell, and we made it a home." The commander said nothing. Jason nodded slowly. "So here's my report. You tested the wrong species." Alrix looked like he wanted to speak, but the cadets stepped forward in silent formation. 12 worlds, 1 line. He turned and boarded the ship. Later, in the evac hold, as they finally lifted off the jungle moon, Raella sat beside Jason. Her wing brushed his shoulder. "Do you think they'll try this again?" Jason stared at the planet receding below them. "Not like this." "Because we beat it?" "No." He turned to her. "Because next time they know we'll be ready." Above them, in the quiet halls of Coalition Command, someone reviewed the field report, and for the first time in a long time, they hesitated, because they hadn't just seen another test passed. They'd seen the beginning of something else. The rise of a species too stubborn to die, too clever to break, too human to control, too